India's market news headquarters. Cutting-edge analysis. Influential insights. Market-moving intelligence. Broadcasting live from the CNBC TV 18 Motilal Oswal studios in Mumbai.
I, Manmohan Singh, do swear in the name of God I am not going to be a candidate for the Prime Ministership if the UPA were to come back into power. माना कि तेरी दीद के काबिल नहीं हूँ मैं, तू मेरा शौक तो देख, मेरा इंतजार देख.
Good morning. Welcome to Morning Call, live from the CNBC TV 18 Motilal Oswal studio. I'm Latha, Venkatesh, and with me is my colleague Surabhi Upadhyay. We, of course, are starting on an extremely somber note. My career in journalism started in 1991. Well, it started in May, but in June came the big budget announcements. I was too much of a cub reporter to understand much, but today we understand the magnitude of both the contribution and the loss.
Latha, good morning to you. Good morning to all our viewers. I'll tell you this, from our standpoint, we were much, much younger, only in school. So we didn't understand the magnitude of what the Indian economy was going through till much later, till college and beyond. But we saw the changes that the man who's before us on the visuals right now, the changes that he ushered in, the opening up of the economy. Suddenly we had, things like satellite TV, foreign brands coming in, more choices as a consumer. And all of that being architectured by Dr. Manmohan Singh, invaluable contribution to the Indian economy. But you've seen him through the years, and from finance secretary, from being the deputy chairperson of the planning commission, to being the former governor of the Reserve Bank. Just take us through some of your thoughts and your imprints.
Okay, on a very personal note, I was in college when he was governor and he was invited to give away prizes. And I have got an elocution prize from him. That was, at a time when you're too raw to understand the magnitude of changes that were happening. But like I told you, my first day in journalism, or first month in journalism, was when this massive liberalization happened. But let me go back. Even as Governor, Reserve Bank, I think he put in some pillars which we now take for granted. As soon as he came, he asked Dr. Sukumar Chakraborty, at that time, by far the best economist we had, to go through the CRR, SLR rules. And it was Sukumar Chakraborty who wrote those rules because Dr. Manmohan Singh asked him to. That contribution of Manmohan Singh is not realized, that he literally built some of the building blocks of the Reserve Bank and the banking system even today. And then, of course, as you pointed out, Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission advising the Rajiv Gandhi government. But the biggest part obviously was in 1991. We must understand the magnitude and the courage of what he did. India had enough dollars to pay for 3 weeks of oil imports. That's it. In the face of that, he, along with Dr. Rajan and the other important decision makers of the time, and of course, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, they actually brought down the import controls. Import controls were put in because we don't have dollars. Yeah. He brought down the import controls, the courage, so that the imports come in and you're able to export. All export is, value addition to imports, to make that very brave decision. And then, of course, they gave us every one of our markets. At that time, deposit rates and lending rates were administered by Reserve Bank. Banks didn't set them. It was under Rangarajan and Manmohan Singh as finance minister that those were freed. Foreign exchange, the Reserve Bank set what will be the value of the rupee every day. They put in something called the LERMs, liberalized exchange rate mechanism, whereby 40% the exporters surrendered to Reserve Bank at a fixed rate, but remaining 60 went to the market. And in over 1 year, the entire exchange rate market was liberalized, something China has not been able to do even today.
Yeah.
We have a free exchange rate, at least on the current account. Likewise, the government securities market, the government could borrow any amount. It was called the ad hoc treasuries. Just say that we are running short of 50 crore, they would issue those treasury bills. Banks had to buy them because they were all nationalized. He stopped the ad hocs. And I remember the press conference, he came to Bombay University, and I went there part as a student, part as a reporter. The economics fraternity was very proud that, one of them, an economics professor, had become finance minister. He explained to us how the government was putting curbs on itself. And a government securities market was born. But let me not run away with my impressions as a young cub reporter, because we have two people joining us who have worked with him very closely. Joining me now is Dr. D. Subbarao, former governor of the Reserve Bank, and again, former secretary, known him very well, and Dr. Raghuram Rajan, again, almost a disciple and a protege of Dr. Manmohan Singh in many ways. Dr. Rajan, Dr. Subbarao, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Subbarao, first, your thoughts. I think you were with him in 1991, weren't you?
Yes, I was in the Ministry of Finance in 1991. But I was a mid-level officer. I didn't work directly with the finance minister. I was 4 or 5 layers down. But you could see the difference in North Block when Dr. Manmohan Singh had come in as finance minister, because for 2-3 years before that, we were struggling with our foreign exchange balances, balance of payments, etc. And the electric energy that Dr. Manmohan Singh's induction into the finance ministry brought into North Block was very, very palpable. And of course, all the reforms that you just talked about happened I think, in the first 3 months of his becoming finance minister. They were truly transformative.
Dr. Rajan, thank you very much. I guess it's late evening from where you are. Tell us your first impressions. I guess he was, in a way, a guru for you.
Well, it certainly is a sad day. He was an economist in a sense, because as you pointed out, in the initial reforms he carried out, you had to have faith in the theory, that the theory would work, that in the face of a currency crisis, you liberalized imports. Ordinarily one would think that would suddenly boost imports and you would have more of a problem. But he saw that as part of a package which would set India on a new course. And I think, we've had 3 decades of robust growth since then, 6% by and large, something nations would kill for. And I think he laid the foundations for that, of course, along with Prime Minister Narasimha Rao.
Dr. Subbarao, the birth of the middle class was also because of him. In the previous years, you couldn't import a television set, a refrigerator, nothing. I mean, everything was, I think, 250% imports. If you could tell us how literally a middle class got created at that time.
First, like you said, the economic reforms, there were 3 things that were done. First was liberalizing imports that you talked about. And as Raghu just said, that had a transformative impact on indeed the entire country, but certainly on the middle class, because they suddenly felt rich about the income transfers that had taken place. The second thing was delicensing of the industry, and the third was the government moving away from public sector investment. I think those are the 3 pillars of the economic reforms carried out in 1991. Liberalizing imports, like giving up the ideology of self-sufficiency. The second was delicensing industries, and somewhat giving up the faith in public enterprises and reimposing faith in the private sector. I think that did a great thing, especially, for certain parts of the country. Like, we used to think of India as a divided nation, East-West divide. The states to the west of that land, Maharashtra, Gujarat, etc., prospered. Before reforms, much of public investment went into the eastern part of the country. because that's where public enterprises investment took place. But when reforms happened, the whole country got integrated. A lot of private investment had come in. I think the middle class certainly saw that as a transformative experience.
Okay. Well, Dr. Rajan, if you have to write an obit as to what India would remember him or should thank him for, what would they be?
Well, I think we've already talked about the initial reforms when he was finance minister. I mean, that is huge, and it still plays out today. But I think we should also remember that in his term as prime minister, we had some path-breaking legislation which went as much to redistribute the pie as it was to grow the pie. Indeed, he had a lot of success growing the pie. His years in office were years of extraordinary growth despite the global financial crisis intervening in the middle. But you must also remember that Narega was in his time. It's been a huge source of support for the rural poor, especially in bad times. It was what helped them through the COVID pandemic. We also had the National Food Security Act, again, a very far-sighted act which has helped our very poor keep body and soul together and reduce, to some extent, we need to do more, of course, on this, the extent of malnutrition, which has been a curse for this nation. But also, apart from those, distributive reforms, he also put in place the right to information. I think that's a far-seeing act, one of the few acts by governments post-independence which have curbed their own power and given more power to the people, giving people the right to ask questions of the government. So I think people will see in time his prime ministership also as on par with his term as finance minister.
No, absolutely, Dr. Rajan, take your point completely. And I was actually coming to just that. His legacy as the Prime Minister and the decade that we saw under him, you, of course, enumerated a lot of the legislative reforms that he ushered in, and many of them continued. I mean, irrespective of the governments that came after, many of this still continued. So that's something that we remember as well. But I just want to understand that from your perspective, your lens, and also your time at the Reserve Bank of India, how did you see industrial policy shape up in the 10 years that Dr. Singh was Prime Minister? We had the animal spirits unleashed, but then we had this great global financial crisis hit the world. So how do you see those years and his contribution to industry?
I think that would be to Dr. Subbarao.
Dr. Subbarao and yes, Dr. Subbarao and Dr. Rajan, because after that we also talk about the excesses, and then the bad loan problem and the AQR that Dr. Rajan, of course, was spearheading to clean up the balance sheet. So I just want to get both of your gentlemen's views on the economic, the industrial policy and the economic measures that really shaped industry in that decade under his leadership as Prime Minister. Dr. Subbarao, let me come to you first.
Yeah, first, as I said before, we moved away from our faith in the public enterprises. Private enterprise was given a big boost, and that was had a great impact. Second, import delicensing and industry delicensing. I think that contributed to the rise of entrepreneurism across the country. For a long time, there was demand for entrepreneurism. There was supply of entrepreneurism, but the demand and supply did not meet. And I think those reforms helped give rise to entrepreneurism across the country. I could see I was, working in the state government for many years when we were in the pre-reform period. And I could see that there was a lot of entrepreneurism in the country, but that did not have any encouragement. So what the reforms did was to unleash this burst of entrepreneurism. And second, delicensing meant that private enterprise could go whatever to, before reforms, the government decided who should invest, where investment should take place, how much they should produce, at what price they must sell. I think that changed with the reforms, with the industrial delicensing. And with imports, with import decontrol, industry could import whatever they wanted. That got a fillip for exports as well. So, and during my time as governor, there was this big issue about foreign direct investment into single brand retail. And RBI was unconnected with that the policy. But Dr. Manmohan Singh called me one day and said, can I have RBI's opinion on this? I was a bit surprised because that, of course, as I recall, was quite contentious and controversial. But he had that regard for the RBI, and he asked for the RBI's opinion on FDI into retail, how the government should approach that. So I think Dr. Manmohan Singh had a great impact on the rise of entrepreneurism across the country and on getting foreign investment into the country and thereby improving technology within the country.
Yes, absolutely. FDI and retail. Thank you for, putting that on the table as well and jogging our memory again. That was another one of those landmark changes in policy that was finally sort of, ushered in to get foreign investment in the retail sector as well. Dr. Rajan, now coming to you. You were, of course, always a keen India watcher. You were watching a lot of this, policy play out. What were your observations of the Indian economy, Indian industrialists, the Indian capital markets during that time? Because it was also simultaneously the time where you were watching the excesses of the West build up in, your famed and acclaimed paper where you warned of the GFC. So how did you view India and the changes that it was undergoing in that decade?
Well, first, before the global financial crisis, we had very strong growth. And, Dr. Subbarao came in just when that ended with the global financial crisis. Unfortunately, what happens in banking sectors is first, there is euphoria after successful growth. Bankers were telling me about that time when they were running after sort of entrepreneurs with checkbooks. And we financed a lot of investment. That was a period when India was really investing an enormous amount. And of course, with the slowdown in the global economy, with the slowdown in the Indian economy, some of those investments did not come to fruition, and bad loans started building up. But, if you integrate over the entire period of Dr. Manmohan Singh's prime ministership, growth was quite substantial. And there was a recovery which was coming into play towards the end of his time, brought about by, sensible policies in response to the global financial crisis. To some extent, we had a substantial amount of fiscal stimulus in response. Perhaps we stimulated too much, but we started tightening. Mr. Chidambaram came into the finance minister's office, and we saw a tightening of the fiscal, perhaps just before the taper tantrum hit us. Helped us manage the taper tantrum somewhat better because of those policies.
Yeah. We're just wanting to wind up, Dr. Rajan and Dr. Subbarao. I want something personal that you'll remember, since you all knew him so well personally. Dr. Rajan, I remember, I think he called you Raman always. He never got your name right. I remember once when he was inaugurating the RBI archives before you were at that time governor designate. Any personal things that you want to remember? He almost mentored you at that time.
Yeah, no, he was obviously a very astute economist, but he was also politically very savvy. Which doesn't come across because he was such an understated person. But to do what he did, to accomplish what he did, you have to have a good sense of the political environment also. On a personal note, what I remember most is an episode which I've recounted elsewhere also, where, in the middle of, I think it was 2012, Dr. Subbarao will remember because he was on this panel with me. We had been invited by Ishwar Ahluwalia to talk about, so many years since the 1991 reforms. I think it was a book release. There were 5 panelists, Dr. Subbarao, Ishwar Ahluwalia, T.N. Nainan, me, and Dr. Manmohan Singh. Okay. And, Dr. Subbarao was very, very circumspect because he was RBI governor. But 3 of us were very insistent that the economy was going off track. And Dr. Manmohan Singh was the last speaker, and he listened to all the criticism by his friend, Dr. Ishwar Aluwalia, and me, who I was sort of the informal economic advisor to him. And he said, look, you have said all important things. I need to reflect on this, think about it, and do what is necessary. He didn't take it badly. He didn't react. He wasn't defensive. He just took the criticism. And later he acted. I think, he did a number of things, including bringing back Mr. Chidambaram into the finance ministry at that time. That was the character of the person that, even as prime minister, he was open to criticism and actually was willing to hear it and act upon it. He never was defensive. He never wrote a book about his life in office, defending the various policies. I think that really suggests somebody who was different and unique.
Fair point, Dr. Rajan. Thank you very much for joining. Dr. Subbarao, any personal anecdote?
Yeah, sure. What I remember about Dr. Manmohan Singh is that he was a great listener. Even if you told him lots of things that he already knew, he listened very patiently, just if he might get a new nuance or whatever. I thought that made him a great leader. The second thing was, I think Dr. Manmohan Singh had great regard for the Reserve Bank of India. He'd understood that the Reserve Bank is a treasure trove of knowledge. If he wanted an opinion from an outside government source, he always sought the RBI's opinion, like I said, about the FDI and single brand retail. He sought our opinion about the land acquisition bill. He sought our opinion about the NREGA expansion. And you also, once he asked me sometime, about 6 months after I'd got into the Reserve Bank, why is everybody talking about the Reserve Bank policy? And I just kept quiet. Then he said, something very, as if he spoke to himself. He said, the RBI is a great institution. Everybody should not be talking about what the RBI ought to be doing. And I don't know what he did after that, but within 2 weeks after that, people stopped talking about RBI policy. But one thing I remember very well about him, a personal anecdote, when I was appointed governor, I went to call on him in his North Block office. There were just the two of us. It was just a short meeting, 15 minutes. And we talked about, the financial situation, the economic situation, my experience as the finance secretary. We compared his experience as finance secretary with mine. We talked about living in Mumbai and living in Delhi. And after about 7-8 minutes into this conversation, I told him, sir, you were governor yourself. So do you have any advice to give me? A humble man, he said, what advice do I give you, Subbarao? You know the country, you served in the IAS, you served at the state level, at the national level. You know the RBI as well. Do your best, I'm sure you'll do very well. And then I took leave of him. And as I was walking towards the door, he graciously walked from behind his chair, escorted me to the door. And as I half opened the door, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, Subbarao, I changed my mind. You sought my advice. I just want to give you one bit of advice, and which is this, that, when you go into the RBI, you will get so immersed in numbers like money supply, credit growth, inflation, interest rate, repo rate, that you will forget that there are real people behind these numbers. Always keep your ear close to the ground. Now, when I walked out of his South Block office, that advice disappeared from my mind within about half a minute. But when I came into the RBI, I started working. In about 6 months, I realized the import of Dr. Manmohan Singh's advice, because what he was really telling me was that the mandate of RBI is inflation. Inflation hurts poor people more than it hurts others. Yeah. It's a regressive tax. So, do remember people behind the decisions you take.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for narrating that beautiful incident and reminding us also that these are not numbers, but there are real people behind it. Dr. Rajan and Dr. Subbarao, we haven't finished, of course, speaking about him. but we have a trading day ahead. I just remember this, Dr. Kelkar, I think, was saying this, that he was one of those few people who brought in people like, Raghuram, Rajan, Monte Kaluwalia. He went out and told people, that's not your job as finance minister, but he would go out and tell Indians who were doing very well abroad that you should come in and join government. And I think he was personally instrumental in many of these intellectuals who later became policymakers.
No, I just want to say what a beautiful story. And Dr. Subbarao, thank you for sharing that for us. And it's so poignant and so timely as well, right? That tussle between growth and inflation, which is always, going to be discussed around the Reserve Bank of India. It's as relevant today as well. We've got a new man at the helm, and Dr. Shaktikanta Das. We remember, I'm far newer into this than Latha, but we remember the last several, RBI press conferences and speeches till today. It's been all about whether consumer level inflation is really hurting or not, and whether the RBI should be concerned about it or not. So thank you very much for reliving those memories and for sharing those anecdotes with us. Dr. Rajan and Dr. Subbarao, thank you so much for joining in and paying your tributes and your homage as well.